Okay, aloha mai kako, everybody, and welcome to today's Next Steps program, which is fundraising in uneasy times, and it is sponsored by the HLA Advocacy Committee. So mahalo to the Advocacy Committee folks for organizing this session for us today. Before we get started with the program, I just want to briefly mention a couple of upcoming programs. In March, we will have Ralph Toyama of Leeward Community College talking to us about ADA requirements and what we should be doing to comply with those if we're not already. And then in April, we will be having Brian Huffman and Jane Gagne, who will be doing a session on law for librarians. So keep your eyes out open for announcements about those two events. And today it is my pleasure to welcome our speakers who are from the nonprofit organization Nonprofit GrowthGen, and they are Mary Ramsay and Mandy Kirchgessner. And I will let them tell you all about their organization and what they do. So please take it away.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you everybody for having us here. Mary and I are really excited to be joining you and really thankful that we have this opportunity to share some of the lessons that we've learned from a program called the Growing Capacity Project. So Mary and I will share our introductions here in just a minute. Maybe a few more people will come in, but just to give you a little background, we are very eager to learn more about what's happening in your world right now. Mary and I actually met working at Bishop Museum, and Bishop Museum was our partner when we started the Growing Capacity Project, which was really focused on leveraging the collective resources and ideas and creativity of people working in museums and cultural preservation and perpetuation in Hawaii. So we had some people working in archive spaces, people working in cultural performance and practice, and then the museums across the islands. It was a great opportunity to learn from everybody. So that's what we hope to do with you is learn together. We do want to give a huge mahalo and acknowledgement to the volunteer advisors for the Growing Capacity Project, which were Helena Kapuni Reynolds, Leah Caldera, and Kamala Dupreez. And we also were fortunate to work with a UH grad student, Brentley Sandlin, on the project. And so all of us are very happy to talk about the things that we learned and continue to share the resources from that program. And I'm going to be pasting the link for those in our chat. The three programs, just because we want these resources to be available to you, they're probably fairly relevant to the library field as well, the skills that it takes to cultivate capacity, grow your network, continue to advance your mission and your purpose. Those resources are available to everybody because they're an Institute of Museum and Library Services grants. And so the three programs that we have focused on gathering all of our resources amongst all the participants that are related to nonprofit capacity management, board management, fundraising. Program 2 was very focused on project management skills, and program 3 was focused on grant writing, grant seeking and writing, and everybody actually developed a proposal for a real funder. And so we have those links there to our website that actually connect you to our YouTube channel for the project, as well as the toolkits that live in Google. So you can access examples of things and templates of things, hopefully, if any of it seems important to you. So today, again, Mary and I are not librarians. We haven't worked in this field. We're certainly not the experts, but we have prepared and studied to try to make sure the information we can share with you is relevant to what you're doing and try to be a thought partner with you. We'd really like to hear you explain what you're experiencing and where you're feeling stuck. And we'll draw upon the collective resources of the group to try to troubleshoot, the challenges that we're facing. We do have some ideas around things related to partnership, funding, and strategy that all tie to fundraising and resource cultivation. But we also imagine that you all have ideas too. So we don't want to take the floor entirely for that. And so as I'm about to hand off to Mary, one other thing, I'm going to be mostly monitoring the chat and acting as our scribe, just so we can kind of focus on roles here. And Mary's going to be facilitating most of the conversation moving forward. But we're happy to make this a very we want to make this very interactive and hear your ideas. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
Thank you, Mandy. Hi, everyone. And I noticed there's two folks here who were our colleagues in the Growing Capacity Project. So Helen and Eric, thank you again. It's nice to see you here. Um, we thought we would take a little time right up front to have you introduce yourself. And if you would just tell us your name and the organization library that you're affiliated with and where it's located in Hawaii, and just one thing that's on your mind right now when it comes to fundraising and capacity building. So, Mandy, I think you were going to just put a list in the chat box so that we could just go in order. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Mandy.
I'm sorry, you popped up onto the front of my screen. Zoom is prioritizing you.
not to put you on the spot or anything.
Aloha.
Aloha.
I'm Helen Wong Smith. I'm currently the archivist for University Records at UH Manoa, but I do a lot of community work, a lot of work with community archives. And so, things like the Lanai Cultural Heritage Center, um, doing their they had an IMLS grant. It was taken away, it was reinstated, so because of the so many of the organizations that I work at Papaolo Lokahi, so many of these organizations have been relying on federal funds, and then now that's so precarious. So that's why we're examining and investigating other types of funding sources. Okay.
Thank you. So it's kind of the federal landscape and other funding sources that's on your mind.
Sure, you
Yeah.
betcha, yeah. I
Oh,
mean, I
yeah.
have not been above applying for Salchuk, the I think it was when I was the ED for the Kauai Historical Society, I actually got money from Salchuk that I
Wow.
had never heard of that before, but hey, I got enough money to supplement
Yeah.
my HCH grant, so
Fantastic.
you just take whatever you can.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Helen.
Okay, I guess I'm next. Hi, I'm Lynette Taruya. I'm at the University of Hawaii Manoa. I'm the Okinawan Studies librarian. And with regard to funding, we had an NRC grant in the past, but um, that's no longer the case anymore. So I am trying to look at different things and that NRC was for our collection development. So
Mm,
it really helped a lot, but now I need to go and look for other resources.
mm,
Thank you.
mhm. Thanks, Lynette.
I will read Ty's out because Ty does not have a microphone, but from Chaminade University on Honolulu. Um, what's on Ty's mind is just curious to see what kind of resources are out there. They're currently downsizing, so not sure what will be left of the collection.
Wow. Thanks, Ty.
Michelle.
Hi, aloha. I'm Michelle Mitchmore with the Hawaii Council for the Humanities. So excited to hear your mention of an HCH grant, Helen. I hope it was us. Yay. And we also had over 80% of our operating funds being from NEH. So we had significant downsizing. And yeah, and then looking towards the future, how much can we count on as the environment continues to be quite difficult, and how to plan for growth or to plan otherwise.
That's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Planning. Yeah, thank you.
Michiko.
Hi, my name is Michiko Joseph. I'm the library director at University of Hawaii at West Oahu. I'm just kind of like Ty. I'm just curious to see what you guys are doing out there.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Paul, if you can chime in, and then I think we have Eric, and that might be it. Oh, Ellen Ray after that.
My name is Paul. I'm at Hawaii Pacific University. I was just listening in. Yeah, I haven't done any fundraising here yet, but I was just interested in hearing about it, various ideas. Sorry,
Yeah.
can't
well,
offer more.
No, glad you're
That's
here,
fine.
Paul.
I think I'm up. Aloha, I'm Eric Chang with the East West Center Arts Program. Great to be here with you all. Not a library, but we support the archive here in-house and partner with libraries often on programming across the state. Fundraising wise, the center is still about 60% federally funded. And that funding has always been in jeopardy, but now more than ever. So it's actually been great since last year, just finding ways to like hooey up locally to address this shared environment. And importantly, finding the things that we can each offer and communicating the needs that we have. So yeah, happy to be part of this group too. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Good to see you. So I get the sense that most of those present here are affiliated with university, college, library systems. Remind me if there are some working in the public library stratosphere. Not so much.
If you want to raise your hand to indicate if you're in the public sector, that'd be great. And then Mary, my mistake, I think Ellen Ray, I think I skipped her.
Oh, please. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Ellen, do you want to jump in?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you so much. I was a little
Welcome.
late, but yeah, so I'm working at the Center for Labor Education and Research at UH West Oahu, and I'm also the president of Hawaii Library Association this year. And I was just hearing a lot about, the concerns that we saw with IMLS funding go down last year, but then it kind of came back, and yeah, and the NEH funding, HCH, which is a very huge source for libraries that also do archives work. And um, I kind of echo what Eric said about like what we can do locally, because I know we have so much amazing collections out here in our, in our repositories and in our libraries and archives. And how might we leverage some of the really amazing resources to show the value of our field, our professional information field in Hawaii that serves the education and cultural sectors, which are huge components of our economy, but I don't know, like how can we leverage that value for us and talk about the specialness of how deep our history is and broad it is. So I'm looking for that kind of strategy.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Good. Okay, so I'm wondering if we could start this conversation. And as Mandy said, this is, I think, I like to think about this as often the solutions for things, or at least the possible ways to approach things might be present among you, and hearing each other talk about how you're dealing with particular things, and Mandy and I adding in perhaps our perspective based on the work we've done. So I think one of my primary questions would be, considering that many of you have been impacted by the restrictions on federal grants and the confusion and chaos that is happening, how are you finding that's affecting sort of your organizational budget or your operating operations? Is it, a couple of you mentioned downsizing. Give us a sense of what you're finding is the impact of this. And we'll do that popcorn wise. Anyone can share and don't, yeah. Maybe another way to say this is, are these funds, the lack of funds from the federal government, causing you to downsize, do less, have to think about your priorities in a different way? Are you are you operating with fewer staff hours, those kinds of things? And what's that been like for you?
Well, I'll just chime in, not talking about myself or my institution, but we had a program on this Next Step series a few months ago with the Hula Preservation Society. And they mentioned during that session that as a result of the grant reduction in grant funding, that they are just having to slow down a lot of their projects. They're not necessarily laying people off or anything, but they're definitely not getting things done as quickly as they had hoped.
Very good point. Okay, so kind of slowing down.
Absolutely, for Papaololokahi, once they did not receive the IMLS grant, and I was a grant reviewer for that, so I had to recuse myself. I knew that they had the highest scores, and it was gone. They had to cease and desist until we find other funding. Um, for Lanai, we because it was they said stop. We don't know what, you may not. We were selected to present at ATOM and we couldn't go because they had stopped it. So that was another impact. Now they've reinstated it. Now we're going to try to get back and see if I submitted a proposal to ATOM. So huge impact.
Huge. Absolutely. Absolutely. Other ways that you all are seeing the impact? Cut more journals from an already thin physical journal collection. One of the databases was, sorry, let me see that whole comment there.
Thank you for that, Ty.
Yeah. One of the databases was funded by a grant that the university wasn't able to renew. Yep. Other thoughts, maybe one or two more, and then we can talk a little bit about what opportunity this might present or offer.
We haven't had to cut any resources just yet, but we're monitoring closely ones that potentially could be if anything goes with the budget. And I think some of the international students have not been able to continue here as readily as they could with the federal funding changes.
Interesting. Yeah, so it's affecting your student population. Yep. One more thought? I mean, I imagine, so the reason we're talking about this is because the sense that we have and we're hearing in the field is that this, so much of people's organizational support is coming often from federal grant funding. And so as a result of all this, it's really having an impact on day-to-day operations. And so Mandy and I were thinking a little bit about that beforehand and thinking that in many ways, it's a time to regroup. And I think that when you have a limitation on organizational capacity, it becomes important to think about the trade-offs, and so one of the thoughts Mandy and I had is, and this is a little more relevant maybe to public libraries, but if you have the option of either keeping the library open for a certain number of hours or doing some of the kind of strategic thinking that will help you look ahead to how you might respond should the federal grant landscape continue to be so uncertain and funding very uneasy. I think that's a really good word. Where do you put your priorities? I think it's a really interesting moment to sort of rethink priorities for your organization. So I'm wondering if any of you have found yourself doing that, and if so, if you'd be willing to share a little bit how you're reprioritizing during this time.
I'll kind of
Go ahead, Mandy.
I say, so just to kind of spark a conversation. So some of the things I've heard people talk about reprioritizing is determining which collections are the most important or maybe have the highest ROI, for being able to preserve the things that are more important to your operations. And Mary also had mentioned that she's been seeing a lot of limited library hours compared to what, the public hours would have been, perhaps in past years, due to cutbacks and trying to do more with fewer people. So those are like examples of reprioritizations that we're seeing. And the reason why I think this is important, for us to understand is because if you are making conscious choices about reprioritization, there are stories and information to be gathered about those impacts when it comes to advocating for a resource that's moving forward, if that makes sense. So if you have examples of reprioritizations or where you've drawn back um, or aha moments that you've had about what is essential to your operations, that would be very helpful.
And mission. No.
One thing that comes to mind about the IMLS funding cuts is that it affected our EBSCO host. We have a consortium that the public library served as like the financial bowl, I guess, to hold the money. And so they were paying the big money to pay off the vendors. And then the campuses, which are school and college libraries, would pay back the state library for the services of those databases. And so I actually don't know what happened, if anybody is on this call that is part of the consortium, to figure out if CLEM is deciding to take over now for the UH libraries. So there's like a whole, I was very vulnerable because that would mean we would lose a lot of electronic databases across campuses and school to college. But I don't know if we have capacity to even hold, to be a fiscal sponsor. Like, I don't even know. That was the first time I figured that. I was like, oh my gosh, like.
Yeah. Does anybody have any information about that you can share? Or where to go to obtain some of that info? Or maybe we can try to figure that out, Ellen, in some form, if no one here kind of has that info, but it sounds like you're kind of operating in the dark a bit right now. Yeah, which is.
Yeah, like so the Hawaii Library Association was approached to be a alternative fiscal sponsor if CLEM and the UH system libraries couldn't manage it. But we're a volunteer board, we don't have any staff, and our money wouldn't be able to pay off the huge thousands of dollars upfront, And so we were like, CLEM. And so the last I heard is that CLEM was thinking about it, but he also has a lot of things on his plate with his staff. So I am in touch with like Alfie and others who are part of that consortium. I guess that information could be discovered about what the next steps are. Or if the something.
Yeah, good question. Yeah. Well, one of the things I think that is an interesting question right now, and I'm hearing it be talked about in different ways, is planning. How do we plan when there's so much uncertainty and we can't sort of expect things to be operating in the way we've been accustomed to in the federal grant world, particularly. And so I'm wondering how your organizations are approaching the planning. In some of the conversations that Mandy and I have been in, we're hearing people talk about just focusing on the next year or two and not trying to get out ahead too much. Because I think, if there is the possibility of approaching strategic planning a little differently during this time, it can help an organization, your libraries and organizations, to begin to see what priorities really rise to the top during a time of uncertainty. So have you been able to, I don't know about you, but I know in my life and in the work I've done, sometimes it takes a particular brain, to to do strategic planning. It kind of, for me, often has necessitated stepping out of my day-to-day operations and stepping out of the weeds, so to speak, and trying to draw back and look at the bigger picture. But I'm wondering if you're finding the need to do that, how you've approached that during this time, what form that's taking, and whether that's helping you and your colleagues determine where you want to put your energy right now in terms of your priorities.
We really wanted to focus on, resources tied to accreditation, maintaining those, and only considering those that are not directly tied, if something changes. That's the main concern. But
and Paul, when you
yeah,
say that, are some of those resources now not so strong that are tied to your elections for accreditation? Like, what's the link there to funding and fundraising?
They're not funded by NEH or anything, but by the library. But yeah, I wouldn't know the exact details.
Yeah, but it's a concern to keep having support for those resources that are going to help you get reaccredited.
Yeah, that's the main focus.
Okay, that's important to know. Yeah. Other thoughts for yeah, go ahead.
Oh, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Other thoughts about planning? Are you able to do it? Who's, what is are you needing to change a plan that was in place because of what's going on?
Well, I think like we had the NRC grant, the federal grant that got cut, and that was a big part of our well, at least for my collection anyway. It supplemented our regular library. My budget to begin with is not very big for my collection. So we had the NRC grant, which is the East Asia NRC grant. And so, I would do that for my collection development. And so that helped quite a bit. But what that did was when it's cut, I have to be careful about spending, how I spend the money that I have for my book funds. And we try to support our faculty and students, their research and things. So we prioritize, if we have requests for things that people send in. And so what that does is in the first half of the fiscal year, we try not to spend, well, at least I haven't tried to spend so much, like, because in case people needed things that I had to kind of watch for it. So I think it slows down the spending of our money. Like, we have to finish everything by the end of the fiscal year. But because we're trying to be mindful of being able to support our students and faculty, that we don't spend the money right away. And so it slows the spending down. And then maybe at the end of the year, we're probably gonna have to like rush and, try to finish that up. So it really does throw, time-wise, it throws things off too.
And just in a sense of the talking about planning, do you find yourselves sort of in the moment just trying to respond to the needs of students and faculty, or have you been able to sort of look at this potential change in your yearly process to sort of begin to plan, should we have money left at the end of the year, these are our priorities for spending, so that you're not finding yourselves at the end of the year sort of scrambling? It's,
Right. I mean, we have an idea of, what our, well, first we would prioritize the students and faculty, their research needs and whatnot. But we do have other areas that we're trying to build in terms of my area studies collection. So that's where I would focus on if we have the money to spend, like I would focus on that. But It
Mm-hmm.
is a little hard to plan if you're not sure, students need things like, especially for like the doctoral students and whatnot, what they might need for their research.
Yes, yeah. But I think you're giving us a really good example of kind of looking ahead and noting this shift. And, clearly your priority, as you stated it, is your students and faculty needs. And then if there's money left over, there's that opportunity to kind of, as you said, prioritize the collections that you're building. So,
Right.
I think that's a really good example of something that we all probably need to do in different ways during this time.
Mhm.
Um, and and in a little while, we'll probably talk a little more about, are there alternative ways to think about funding some of those things that might have been funded in the past by federal grants.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there other thoughts about planning or prioritizing that have worked for you during this time that you'd like to share with others? Or conversely, are you feeling kind of like totally thrown into a different place right now where you're having to put your focus on mainly, just managing the day to day and not so much on the planning and the prioritizing?
Well, I'll just throw in here that, those of us who work at the University of Hawaii at Manoa Library, Lynette just explained how the NRC funding cut has affected her, but at the same time, our library got a big Mellon grant to cover something that was a priority for the university, which is to make the library a more Native Hawaiian place of learning. So we have been able to hire staff and are working on a number of different projects under that umbrella. So, at the same time that we're trying to adjust to having less federal funding, we've actually been blessed with this private funding. So I'm wondering, what your thoughts are about just changing our perspectives to think more in terms of private funding instead of federal funding.
Excellent point. Should we go there? Move into that direction? I think so. So congratulations. That's wonderful. And I wonder if you could speak. So yes, my sense, and I think Mandy's as well, and probably those of you here are thinking along these lines too. Um, I think when something begins to get to be very uncertain, it's time to open the doors to other possibilities. And I think for a long time, I don't know if you would agree with this, but in my experience, especially when I was working at Bishop Museum, they were not setting their sights quite that broadly. They were definitely applying for federal grants in all different ways, but they weren't necessarily thinking about some of those larger private foundations like Mellon, because it just seemed like Mellon was so far away, a New York-based kind of organization. How do you cultivate a relationship? Often you have to be invited, to submit a proposal. How do you begin this process of thinking more broadly? And just to say, and then I want to hear a little more from you about Mellon, if you don't mind. The the There are shifts that you're probably aware of in how some of these larger foundations are trying to open the doors to people applying to them, kind of increase access and not be so focused as they were, say, 10 or 15 years ago on just a certain small population of organizations, whether it's higher ed or otherwise. And I think especially Mellon, and I think they're trying to figure out how to position themselves now with DEI so under fire by the federal government, but they're finding their way still, to increase access and to kind of drill down a little more deeply beyond the usual players. So could you tell us a little bit about how the process happened for your organization getting this grant? The university, how did they begin to develop the relationship that led to an invitation to apply?
I don't know the whole story, but I think that Helen might be able to fill in some of the blanks there.
Yeah, I'm a recipient, part of one of the recipients of this great big
Great.
grant, 3.2. Um,
Wow.
so it started off with Siobhan Matsuda from Maui Community College, and they had put out a um, paper several years ago examining how Native Hawaiians are served or underserved for library and archival collections. And you know, it everything from did they feel welcome? Were the subject headings accessible to them? Did they understand the format? And so what they've done in the meantime is they've come up with this initiative, the Hawaiian Knowledge Organizational System. And this is supposed to, the goal is so that we describe our collections from a Hawaiian worldview. And so, and I've been doing this in different collections for several decades now. You know, back then we used to call it local subject headings. And so these are part of their application was to have a permanent Native Hawaiian initiatives, library initiatives, position that has been filled with Kavena Komeji, who was the librarian out at UH West Oahu. And it includes things like, you know, applying these Hawaiian in worldviews to library and archival resources. So that is one way that, you know, this took several years for them to build this relationship with Mellon, but it's a big payoff. What we're doing at Papa'ololokahi is we're looking for local um, funders like Alexander and Baldwin. You know, they don't have a
Mm-hmm.
regular schedule of when they review grants, but we felt that because we are Native Hawaiian Health Archives, they will be open to that. But I think when you consider Mellon being so big and yet they are funding this, and the scary part is, or the cautionary tale, I should say, is that everybody at ATOM is applying for melon money. So I was worried, like, let's not, you know, dip into the same well too often.
Mm-hmm.
We have to diversify the private entities. And so I'm happy to say the Society of American Archivists did get a big grant from the Ford Foundation. So, you know, there's just all these, I think we just can't be afraid of applying to these national big guys and also tap into our local foundations and see if that who it resonates with.
Yes, yes, totally agree with that. And I think you're pointing to a couple of really important things. And if I'm not mistaken, there, I feel like there has been an awareness in the Mellon, organization of that has been building about Hawaii. In the recent years, they seem to be focused more now on, indigenous organizations and Native Hawaiian organizations. So, sometimes part one of this, so let's say we're talking now about broadening your funders or the possibilities of who you might go to for funding. And Helen, you spoke of both the large national private foundations and the local private foundations. And sometimes, I know I'm not sure how your system works within your college or university or library, but sometimes in larger organizations like universities, you have a fundraising office that has to either be in the loop or is actually doing the fundraising for you in collaboration with you. And so that may differ among your organizations. But, I think that the first step sometimes is becoming aware of how your priorities align with some of these larger funders. And then in the case of Mellon, for example, it sounds like they're is quite a network of people engaged in that project. So it's not just a single organization, it has broader reach, and so I think sometimes the effort to create relationships and partnerships so that the work you're doing has a broader impact than just it might have if it was just your single organization, that can put you on the radar for these larger national organizations, funders. Um, I think for many years it's been a little mysterious, like how does an organization get on the radar of these large private funders? And so since there is activity happening in Hawaii now, it feels to me like it's an opportunity to learn from those who are getting on the radar and receiving invitations to submit to these larger private foundations to understand what went into that, because I think that it does sometimes take, as Helen said, a few years, from when you begin to cultivate the relationship until that opportunity starts to materialize into an actual proposal. And I think that's one of the thoughts Mandy and I have had to share, and you may already be thinking this way, but I think at a time when resources are lean, it can be a time to think about relationship building. Like, I wonder in a way if, that's some of the shift that might be possible in your organization is, sometimes we're on a hamster wheel and we're going, and we've got a lot of projects we're working on simultaneously. A lot of different people's needs are needing to be met. You're doing the day-to-day. But is it possible during a time when there's a lot that is uncertain and perhaps there's fewer resources that you can predict, to actually set some time aside to begin to think proactively about these relationships? And I'm talking about relationships with these large funders that might seem out of reach right now, but you just never know if you start to join with others and learn a little more about them. There's also this piece that I've been reading a lot about lately that has to do with individual donors. And so, and I'm not sure how much your library organizations have an opportunity to develop and not just develop, but perhaps to deepen some of the relationships with the people in your networks and just how you might go about doing that. So I'm wondering if any of you have approached that in some form. Like, have you been thinking about people who potentially could provide resources, not so much through a foundation, but maybe through a donor advised fund, and often these can be local people who are very familiar with your work. Is there much opportunity for that in your fundraising, system?
Well, I don't know about Ellen in her previous position, but when we accept an archival collection, um, unlike the congressional, she gets a lot of money. Often the politician will, it comes with a lot of money. I get university records, so it doesn't come with a dime. And and then, however, I did survey a collection yesterday from a soon to be retiring professor. And so he's one of the first ones to realize that, and you know him, Mary from Bishop Museum, archaeologist. He's one of the few that realizes that to curate or to hold his papers is going to take some money. So he is setting aside money for that. I think out of desperation, what I've done in the past was get to the point where adopt a collection or adopt something, so just so that it can come from an individual, they'll have their name predominantly, um, prominently exhibited with this resource is available to the generosity of.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent point. I think sometimes that happens in museums too, where somebody donates a material object or a collection, and oftentimes there's not thought given in the moment when that person is in the excitement of the gift to realize that it's going to cost to maintain that collection. So I think that's an excellent point, that if you can keep that front of mind during this time and really begin to talk about sustaining, taking care of, stewarding this collection, Ellen, you may have some thoughts about that too, based on your experience. Yeah. Yeah. Other things when it comes to individual donors, like, do you have ways of tracking, people who visit your collections? And yeah, and if not, that might be, Mandy and I were talking a little bit. Mandy, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the data collection pieces?
Yeah, I'm kind of recognizing we have time here, and there's a lot of wealth in thinking about the long game with these larger donors, privatized donors, and that I'm kind of stuck at the crux of wanting to talk about like a more immediate things that you can do to start bringing in diversified funds. Those who know me probably wouldn't be surprised that like my brain goes straight to data. But Mary and I were having lots of questions about like, what is a good use of time right now when we're already short on funds, right? Like, are we going to close down our organization for an extra 4 hours a week to do what? Or is it to be in the archives? Is it to analyze data and see how people's lives are being affected by this change? So in the chat, I just want to acknowledge that these were some solutions to things that we think people could be doing right now to better position themselves for sustaining capacity over time for fundraising. And Helen, I think it was you that said relationships, and Eric, you had this great term called that you said hooeying up. And I'm really curious to pick your brain a little bit about that, because if you look at everything on our list, it has to do with the relationship being developed with something aside from AI. So, which is a relationship on its own, because you have to cultivate that too, if you go that route. But this idea of, like, if we're thinking about organizations having to close more often, right? I don't know how many of you have had the experience of going somewhere and it was closed and you weren't expecting it to be closed, and there's an emotion attached to that, right? And so potentially libraries across Hawaii could be harvesting data tied to who's coming to be served and is being turned away. What were they here to do? What brought you here? What does this mean for you in your life, right? There could be like a universal survey or something along those lines that you're collecting data about each site and collectively across the state what the impacts are to Hawaii and to each island, so that you can speak to these relationships you're developing with perhaps government officials or smaller foundation representatives. Because when you're starting these new relationships, letting them know that there's a need is excellent, but letting them know that there's a need and here's my backup, my data, my validation that people are missing this resource, or this is causing people to be hurt, can be really, really powerful. And so the relationships you build with each other to cultivate that data, the relationships that you build with a foundation officer to establish that contact and maintain connection over time can be really fruitful. And I just keep on going back to like strengthening partnerships, strengthening our data around this need that we know exists, and what the ripple effects are of not filling that need. So when I think about approaches to things that are going on right now, it's really in building new relationships and maintaining those relationships. So if I had to make decisions about what to cut, I might be cutting public service hours or acceptable curatorial practices that aren't going to affect the archives in a negative way, and really start building the understanding of the impact of the loss of service or right now, if that makes sense. And I'll just kind of an example. I haven't done this in Hawaii in recent times, but Mary and I do have several clients across the continent, and we've been encouraging them to speak to their community foundation representatives and their United Ways. And sometimes that phone call has turned into an instantaneous gift and then a second gift. and they want to be kept in the loop. And so just show of hands here. If anyone's thinking about fundraising, have you ever called a foundation representative? Spoke with a foundation representative? Thumbs up, hands show. Because I think that would be a good personal challenge, is to find somebody who aligns and just have a conversation about where you're at and if they have any ideas about resources. Not asking them for anything, but just sharing and bringing them into the loop. And then that could potentially
just to
inform.
add, Mandy, you know, like you have this existing consortium here, you know, and so I know sometimes it takes extra energy to, you know, kind of collaborate with each other or partner with each other. It's another meeting, it's another whatever, but you have strength in numbers, it seems to me, you know, and how to utilize that. I know you do have I'm trying to remember the name of the committee that is advocacy, right? Is it an advocacy committee that you have? So, you know, maybe thinking creatively about HLA and what it could potentially focus on during this time to help the sector as a whole, you know, develop some new relationships, you know, and just to add to Mandy's list about the Hawaii Community Foundation, you know, it does, the reading that we've been doing has been interesting, because with some of the tax credit changes that are taking place now, and you might want to take a look at those and see if you can get a sense of the impact on sort of people who itemize and people who don't. But what I'm understanding is that many people who have means and want to give funds are putting their donation funds into donor advised funds. And in Hawaii, you know, the Hawaii Community Foundation is one of the sort of holders of donor advised funds, but the Bank of Hawaii also, and several other banking organizations, you know, do kind of track who their donors are, and could potentially help advocate for a support of libraries during this time when there is a gap in funding. So, you know, having these conversations, as Mandy is suggesting, it can be a really good use of your time, whether it's for your individual organization, but perhaps even more so HLA beginning, if they haven't already, to have those kinds of conversations.
Like I think about the EBSCO host situation. I mean, you talk about impact numbers. If you can, that alone, and then Helen with like you said, a little anecdotal snippet of what happens if students can't afford access to scholarly research or whatnot. Like there are people that would jump behind that, but I think bringing them into the conversation earlier rather than later would be very fruitful. And I'll just say, if you guys do decide that you want to go like statewide or island-wide or organization-wide data collection route, I geek out about creating surveys. So if you ever want someone to build like a survey that people access off of a QR code when they go to their front door and you're closed, something like that, I'd be happy to build that infrastructure so you guys can just slap it up there and collect data. So
who's good at that? So we have 5 minutes left. Is there anything we haven't, there's a million things I'm sure we haven't talked about, but is there anything pressing for you, any one of you, that you'd like us to just get at for a little bit with the time remaining? And if you think of something afterwards, you know, we'd be glad to maintain a dialogue with you around some of your thoughts or questions beyond the itself. But we thought we might end with perhaps each person just talking about something that right now in your field, like what are you feeling good about in spite of some of this crazy time we're in? What gives you hope, or what are you inspired by?
I'd like to share something that the Government Documents Roundtable of ALA, or actually, no, it's the Depository Library Council is putting together a story map that has little stories about how government information impacted people. So they're just little quick anecdotes. And I think that that could be a really powerful way for people to tell their stories, is just to have some sort of like a kind of interactive thing. And I know it takes work to put these things together, but that's what interns are for. Um, so,
Yeah, good idea.
that's the kind of thing that really makes me feel energized is just seeing all the different stories that people have about the impact of their work. So there is hope.
Yes. Oh, thank you for telling us about that. It's exciting. It's the stories. And so maybe that's a better way to ask this question. Do you have a quick story that has inspired you or given you hope?
Can say that I'm really grateful for this talk. I gleaned some ideas from this presentation, so thank you very much. I think the idea of us building relationships with each other, just learning about our needs, I think is a basic first step that I'm hoping to further cultivate through HLA, and trying to see if there's an interest in hosting like a conference or something where the library, museum, and archives people can kind of have tracks and talk about what their needs are, and not trying to create like an expected outcome, but just listening as a contribution to that consortium idea or the collaboration
Mm,
energy.
mm, mm. Thank you, Michelle. Yes. Yes.
Hi, yeah, this is Michelle, and I think we lost the funding so abruptly. You got that letter and no grant money for you. Like what? What? So I think the shock of it kind of made us think very dramatically. And one thing for one of our large programs was to come up with some different scenarios. If we had one is we are no longer able to do this program. How would it be done without us? Another is we do it, but at a very bare bones capacity. And that helped us to rethink things and to put into place some things if we did disappear in a year or two, or if we weren't able to do this in a year or two, how would we communicate it? And it helped us to also think about talking with our partners in new ways, not just, hey, let's just same thing as last year, but maybe more people or a different theme, or really rethink that. We created like a checklist of different responsibilities, what we're doing, what they could do, and it helped us to just rethink how we work together. Another thing we have Hawaiʻi History Day, and even then we were thinking of, sorry, I have a headache, so my brain isn't working that well, but long story short, one of the things we thought about is how can we talk more deeply about what we have to give and what we need. And one of the stories we heard from teachers from the DOE is the desire to find more Hawaii-based primary research sources or resources. So we strengthened our online list of local resources, and then in our teacher workshops have been trying to introduce a research partner to share not just about their collections, but how can teachers help students to navigate in a short period of time, how to find things, or how can they share what they have in a more student-friendly way as opposed to an adult-friendly way. And that's been really helpful. And so in some ways, looking at, I think what Eric said about buoying up is thinking beyond the finances, if that were not there, what are other ways that we can work together to build resilience?
So many good points there, Michelle. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah. Well, I think we're at time. We want to respect your time, and thank you. Thank you so much for coming and for sharing your thoughts. And, I learned a lot, and we're happy to have any follow-up email exchange conversation. And I know that you'll receive the recording of this. And so thank you. And I'm speaking for myself. Go ahead, Mandy.
It's okay. I'm frantically typing our emails into the chat so that everybody can hold on to them. If you have questions, needs, ideas, I know we didn't use our PowerPoint today, but we have a lot of resources on there. So if you have a specific case you want to bring to us, please let us know, because we want to help. The thing that I'd like to end on, more than anything else, is, we went through a lot last year, and finding strength in our community is really important for us to be able to sustain ourselves. But what I'm really learning in the last 2 months or so, and the things that I'm around, is that the value of hope for being able to bring people on board and alongside with you towards that vision. And so if we're not quite at the place yet where you have hope, hopefully you can find people that do have it and kind of be able to feed off of that and join it. But the way that we are going to fundraise and resource our organizations is by helping other people see that beautiful vision that we have, and having that hope. So I look forward to having more conversations about those things as things keep going our direction, and they are starting to. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Mahalo nui loa to both of you for this excellent conversation, and thanks everybody for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at a future event. So mahalo and ahui ho.
Mahalo.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Mahalo.